I'm really curious. I don't know too much about Hasidic Judaism, and I'm really curious about what your kind of daily, just kind of daily rituals, daily practices are, and then also what kind of community you have where you are. I mean, are you surrounded by any sort of family, or is it mostly just friends? And to what extent are they involved with your spiritual practice?
Hmm. Yeah. So that's a really fascinating question. And I can answer only for myself. I can't speak like for anyone else in the community.
Sure.
Everyone individual experience is different and every community is different for sure.
I feel like that's a
Um,
useful disclaimer for all answers to all questions.
yeah,
I can only speak
yeah,
for myself. I don't
yeah.
feel.
So it's also the only thing that we have like jurisdiction and authority to speak about. Right?
Exactly.
Um, so it's interesting in terms of the Hasidic community, in terms of thinking about like daily ritual. It's actually, I mean, I can sort of look as an outsider and say, oh yeah, that's ritual, that's ritual, that's ritual, and I'm like somewhat of a someone who's studying religions. I understand like the way that religious practice is conceptualized and how it's different from secular practice, the distinction between like sacred and profane, and whatever other scholarly jargon we'll use. But for me, as an insider growing up, I never saw these things as ritual. I never saw them as religious practice. There is, for someone who's a practicing Jew, there is no religion even. It's just your way of life. It's
Right.
just who you are.
Right.
Um, so, so like for example, like I'm wearing a kippah, like a yarmulke in Yiddish, and it's to me, it's not an act of devotion. It's not an act of religious expression. Like obviously, if you ask me, I'll say yeah, sure, it's an act of identification. It's an act of this, and it represents that and that. But it's not. It's an article of clothing, and it's I've been wearing it as much as I've been wearing t-shirts and socks like my entire life. So so it's so I don't think about these things ritually, but to take a step back and to look at it from the outsider. um, so the Hasidic Jew, and Hasidic Jew is just one strain as well of contemporary what's called Orthodox Jewry, which is a term which I really don't like. But there are many other practicing Jews, halachic Jews, whatever it is. So the day begins. It's the Jewish life is heavily, having just said what I said, Jewish life is heavily ritualized, and literally every single moment of the Jewish day, there's something Jewish to be doing in that moment. And I'm not saying that hyperbolically. I'm saying that very literally. There's from the moment you wake up and take your first breath as an infant to the moment you close your eyes as a dying human. There's a Jewish thing to be doing that entire time, and before and after. So, uh, and this is kind of the what we spoke about before about this deep holistic integration between Jewish life and practice, where there's no moment which is void or vacuum from that. So the very first thing, so funnily enough, Judaism sees time differently. We have a different we have a lunar calendar as opposed to a solar calendar, but also the way we see days, we don't see the day beginning in the morning. And many Jews won't even know this because Jews are so like westernized and secularized and Christianized. The Jewish day does not begin in the morning. The Jewish day begins sundown, what we think is the day before,
Oh.
and that's that's true for all of Judaism. Yeah, yeah. Ask your Jewish
Ah,
friend. Ask your Jewish day. When does the day begin according to Judaism? And
My Jewish
it's
friends
really
probably don't know that.
it's really
same,
based.
same.
It goes all the way back to Genesis, where the verse in Genesis says, "Vayihi erev, vayihi boker, yom rishon," and it was evening, it was morning, day one, and it was evening, it was morning, day two, and from then
Ah.
on, it's evening then morning. It's not morning evening. The same way that 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 like Sunday, whatever. But so the Jewish day begins with and psychologically as well is something very important here because the way you go to sleep is the way you wake up, right? There's an old Yiddish expression: if you go to sleep like a horse, you wake up like a horse, right? And people that make sort of plans in their mind be like, tomorrow I'm gonna do this, tomorrow I'm gonna quit smoking, tomorrow.
New
There's no
day.
tomorrow. It's now. It's today. It's today or never. So the Jewish day begins when the sun goes down, and there's a lot of across spiritual traditions in the world. There's a lot of significance in moments of transition, and that's in equinoxes, that's in life cycles, but it's also in sunrise and sunset. And there are moments where we can step out and see the bigger picture, see the divine dance. We can see the sun doing its thing again, and we can see. And Judaism sees the sun going down as an act of worship, as an act of praise, as an act of love. And what we do is we stop and we pray. So Jews pray 3 times a day. There's Mincha, Ma'ariv, and Shachrit. And we, so the Jewish day begins with the Mincha Ma'ariv prayer. And it's really just a time to center, to focus. It's a time of, most of the prayer is done silently. Usually it's done with a group of people. Now it's done independently because Corona, which is also a Jewish experience. And then there are a bunch of other things throughout the day. At the end of the day, the way that the Jew eats, whenever a Jew takes a bite of food, we first say a blessing. It's one short line in Hebrew. And it depends, based on what you're eating, it's different blessings. So you have to be basically conscious and think about what you're eating and stop and actually realize and like say thank you, which is an incredible thing.
Like, yeah, that's amazing.
You stop and you say like Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, whatever it is you're saying, and depending on what you're eating and what you're blessing is a different blessing. And when you finish eating, there's also a blessing as well. And these are also the best way I think to think about them is that we can go through life living unconsciously, just sort of on autopilot, or we can be forced to here's a moment where we're forced to come back and to be present again and to remember and to be grateful and to be humble.
Yeah.
That intentionality, right?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful practice.
Yeah, that's hugely missing from so many people that live on kind of autonomous thought. And I'm getting a lot of like Buddhist flavor from what you're talking about. Like in Zen, they talk a lot about mindful eating and just not doing anything else. We always like watch TV or we're on the computer, we're eating, or even with another person, you're having a conversation, but just eating, just being with that, with the food, with the morsels, it's very
which is an incredible
helpful
experience if you're able to be that, right?
Yeah.
And these are very deep, very old Jewish ideas, and people are beginning to realize just how healthy these ideas are, just purely on like an empirical level. And I think like you don't even need to be religious or Jewish or even believe in God to do these. You can be a complete materialistic atheist and be like, hey, I want to take a moment to think about like how did this get from the farm, from the orchard to my plate? Who are the people that were involved in making that happen? And so bring conscious gratitude and appreciation to that process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another just I'm sort of there's like so much that happens in Jewish day. I'm just like the highlight.
Yeah.
Before we go to sleep, we say Shema, which is like a Jewish declaration of faith, and it actually by the Kabbalists read as a declaration of the unity of God and unity of existence. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Which is read in all sorts of fancy, interesting Kabbalistic ways. But basically, the notion that God is all there is, and that being is unified. And there's a moment during that prayer where we're supposed to make what's called Cheshbon HaNefesh, which is an accounting of our day, to think about how we've been, to think about how we are, to think about how we're putting ourselves to sleep. And at the end, we say a final prayer, and we say B'yadcha kibruchi, that into your hands, O God, I give my spirit, which is what happens when we sleep. It's an act of surrendering. It's an act of trust. And we'll wake up in the morning and get our spirit back from God, renewed, refreshed. Padisa Osiadanael Emet. And when we say the final prayer, we don't speak anymore. There's no more talking until you're asleep. And the next words that come out of your mouth are when you wake up. And I mean, talking about like the Jewish law tells you like which side of your body to sleep on, and like it's really very, 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 very
prescriptive.
Very prescriptive. Yeah. We don't sleep on our backs. We don't sleep on our stomachs for fascinating reasons. And the next words that come out of your mouth, you say Modani. You say Modani. I give gratitude to you. Like the cosmic energy, God of the universe, however you want to translate it. That you've returned my spirit to me with great kindness and trust. That I'll like make good use of it for the day. Essentially, is what it means. We then wash our hands in the morning, netilat yadayim, where we cleanse our hands physically, and the whole day continues with this. There's the longest prayer of the Jewish day is then in the morning is Shachrit, where Jewish men typically will wrap tefillin and sit in prayer anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half. And again, it's just a moment of silence, of introspection. Of one would think that like you're spending so much time, in silence and in contemplation and in meditation. Like when do you have any time to do anything? Like you're just gonna be like wasting your whole day in prayer. But it's not true. Like the days that I like start on the right foot and I set my intention and I clear my mind and I'm able to be focused and present, like it pays off like in leaps and bounds, because I know
Absolutely.
who I am for that day. I know why I'm here. I know what I'm doing. I'm centered. I'm grounded. I have a mission. And otherwise, I mean, you can think that you're saving an hour by just like skipping a moment, an hour of prayer, but the rest of your day, you're a scattered person. And I'm not saying that I manage to do it right every day. And some days, like, I don't have the energy and I don't do it, and I brush it off, and I pay for the consequences. But there's always a new day to go at it fresh and new. The Jewish day goes on and on and on, and I'd be happy to continue.
No, that's cool. That's really amazing.
Sure it gives you a sense of it.
I really appreciate, the insight into that. I'm very fascinated by it, and I love, as Bob mentioned, the intentionality behind it. It to me, in my experience, is kind of the foundation of a spiritual practice, right? Is to be intentional as often as possible. And it sounds like your practice is pretty regimented in that way, which is really, really beautiful.